New professionalism called for increased accountability, accountability for crime, for cost, and for conduct. It requires smarter policing, not necessarily working harder, but working smarter, doing more with less, using the resources provided more wisely. New professionalism required fair and participatory disciplinary systems. Legitimacy is conferred by law and by democratic politics. It's earned by adhering to professional standards and winning the trust and the confidence of people police. Now, when we're trying to build legitimacy in an organization, we have to understand that we don't automatically deserve the respect of the citizens that we serve, but we should approach our jobs as if we must win the trust and win the respect and the confidence of the people who we police. Our approach to people will be much different if our attitude is that we must win their trust and respect, as opposed to if our approach and attitude is they are uh, are required by law to trust and respect us. No, that is not the case. People always have a choice. They may follow you, but they don't have to trust you. And so to the extent that we earn the trust of the citizens we serve by adhering to professional standards, we can gain confidence of the people who we police. So what are these sources of integrity, of legitimacy? These sources are professional integrity and trust, policing by the consent of those governed, as opposed to ruling by force or ruling by law or ruling by policy. It's much easier to rule by the consent of those who are governed. If the majority of people will be law-abiding, that makes our job so much easier than if nobody is law-abiding. How then do we measure legitimacy? Looking back at new professionalism, innovations. How can police departments expand innovations? And then national coherence. National coherence, a gathering, a declaring of a closer, more coherent national standard for policing would result in greater mobility. Officers in one department being able to move to another department because the standards are so much closer. In reciprocity agreements and lateral transfers, agreements between agencies to allow officers to work from one agency to the other because the policies and the standards are coherent, they're close to one another. National coherence means that when it comes to protocols or standards, then citizens would be all treated similarly. But in a situation where there is not national coherence, how are citizens in some areas getting what I call the short end of the stick? How are citizens in some areas not receiving the same level of service as citizens in other areas? How can the standards in one area, policing protocols in one area, cause citizens to be subjected to lower quality policing than are citizens in an area with very high standards and very high protocols. Think about that and write a couple of notes down in response. So when we look at all that I've said here over the last 28 minutes or so of this video, that brings us to the question, why is police accountability, legitimacy, innovation, and national coherence so hard to achieve? Why is it so hard to achieve as I move my picture up to a different part of the screen? Let's move on now to criminal investigations. We had a wonderful presentation on criminal investigations, and so I won't go through all of this, but I do want to note several things. Follow-up investigations for criminal investigators include activities such as interviewing victims and checking the crime scene, secondary activities such as collecting physical evidence and canvassing for and interviewing witnesses, and tertiary activities such as interviewing suspects and informants, discussing the case with other police personnel, checking departmental records, and conducting stakeouts. And this is according to John Ack, who published this report on criminal investigators in 1983. Now, much of what detectives do consist of very routine and rather elementary chores, including much paper processing, that a good deal of their work is not only not exciting, it's downright boring, that the situations they confront are often less challenging and less demanding than those handled by patrolling police officers, that it is arguable whether special skills and knowledge are required for detective work, that a considerable amount of detective work is actually taken on a hit or miss basis, and that the capacity of detectives to solve crimes is greatly exaggerated. Contrary to the fictional portrayals of detectives, what we know is that detectives do not work from facts to identification of suspects. They work from identification of suspects back to facts that are necessary to prosecute and convict the suspects. The primary job of detectives is not to find unknown suspects, but to collect evidence required for a successful prosecution of known suspects. Progress in police criminal investigation efforts remain largely isolated from broader police efforts to respond more effectively, more efficiently, and more resolutely to the crime problem in general. The basic work of the criminal investigator has changed very little since the standard model of policing was created during the professional, or also known as the Reform era. Popularized during the 1950s, although forensic technology has evolved considerably. Similar to uniformed patrol officers responding to repeated 911 calls for service, the work of most criminal investigators can also be thought of as being incident-driven or reactive. Investigators respond to recurring incidents. They attempt to gather enough information to generate a warrant or make an arrest, and rarely look for underlying conditions that may be causing like groups of incidents. Police departments today need to engage in a critical examination of the work of their investigators and recognize their importance in understanding and controlling recurring crime problems. A review of the investigative best practices in 6 police departments concluded that strategic management principles and practices could influence clearance rates. The issues that influence the solvability of factors associated with investigative work included budgeting and allocating resources, improving relationships with the prosecutor, interacting with the public, especially victims and witnesses, improving relationships between investigators and patrol officers, decentralizing detective assignments, particularly in neighborhood team policing approaches, using civilian employees for investigative tasks, assigning personnel, supervising and training investigative personnel, improving investigative procedures, and conducting investigative activities not related to specific cases. So what is the impact then of improved investigative techniques and technology on policing outcomes? Well, while improved investigative techniques and technology have arguably improved the likelihood that the right people are being arrested for their crimes, these advances do not seem to translate into increased probability of arrest for offenders. If none of the assumed crime control tenets of the standard model of policing involves investigators trying to prevent future crimes from by generating deterrence through arrest, then their ability to do so today does not seem meaningfully different from in the past. So when we talk about reform policing and we talk about community policing, there's very little talk about how what detectives do has changed during those eras. These innovations represent enhancements to the same basic investigative process rather than strategic changes to prevent crimes from happening in the first place. So this is not to say investigators have no value. However, when the totality of police operations is considered, the cases solved by criminal investigators account for a very small part of the police business. So what percentage of your agency is comprised by investigators? And what percentage of crimes that are solved, or problems that are solved, are actually solved by the investigators in your agency? Think about that. Here is an exhibit 1 here that shows findings of seminal research studies on police investigations of serious crimes. I would ask you to take a look at your notes that I emailed to you, the notes for this lecture. You can see all of this, but I'll move this down here for a moment so that you can see what these lines say. I won't read these lines to you word for word. I'll give you an opportunity to read them yourselves. But what we do see in number 3, that the primary job of detectives, as I've highlighted, is not to find unknown suspects, but to collect evidence required for a successful prosecution of suspects. That hasn't changed in many, many, many years. So how do we move criminal investigations towards crime control? We have to look at some of the promising practices which investigators should consider adhering to, and ask questions: how should the various responsibilities for proactive and problem-solving work be allocated between criminal investigators and patrol? Well, police departments need to engage in a critical examination of the work of their investigators and recognize their importance in understanding and controlling recurring crime problems. Right now, investigators have what I call perverse incentives that run contrary to reducing crime. Investigators typically are graded by the cases that they clear, but clearing cases does not equate to controlling crime. Now, a review of investigative best practices in 6 police departments concluded that strategic management principles and practices could influence clearance rate And this is an investigation that was conducted by Bloch and I believe Whiteman in 1975. Now, the issues that influenced the solvability factors associated with investigative work included budgeting and allocating resources, improving relationships with the prosecutor, interacting with the public, especially with victims and witnesses, improving relationships between investigators and patrol officers, decentralizing detective assignments, particularly in neighborhood team policing approaches, using civilian employees for investigative units. Again, civilian employees for investigative units, okay, or investigative tasks, assigning personnel, supervising and training investigative personnel, improving investigative procedures, and conducting investigative activities not related to specific cases. Criminal investigators should go further than responding to case after case, that they search for solutions to recurring problems that generate the repeated incidents. In order for criminal investigators to be more efficient and effective, they must gather information about incidents and design an appropriate response based upon the nature of the underlying conditions that cause the problems. A data-driven analytic approach, led and supported by investigators, uh, probably would best position police departments to deal with recurring problems that generate the bulk of their city's crime. Police executives need to develop a new case management practice and provide analytic support to criminal investigators in ways that parallel the changes to patrol operations when problem-oriented policing approaches were being implemented in the 1980s and in the 1990s. Now, these administrative arrangements will position investigators to manage their caseloads and work on crime control strategies. If appropriate control strategies are implemented, then there should be a net reduction in investigator caseloads. Okay, there should be a net reduction in investigator caseloads through effective management of recurring crime problems. So, how should various responsibilities um, for proactive and problem solving work be allocated between criminal investigators and patrol officers? There are varying ways this division of labor may be accomplished. One, assign detectives to patrol units and to work with those units. Two, expect detectives to provide intelligence, okay, and uh, provide the intelligence, but leave problem solving responsibility with the patrol groups. Three, uh, hold detectives responsible for specific crime control projects. And four, utilize detectives with their special skills as a deployable central resource upon which other units can draw at will. We've heard the presentation making police more affordable, but to elaborate more on that, what is driving up police expenses? Are police departments growing and providing more services to more people? Or the cost of providing these same services simply going up? Or the factors, are other factors responsible for the increase? What have cities in the United States and their residents received in return for their investment in policing? Are there fewer crimes? Is there a greater sense of safety and more satisfaction with police services? What has happened to the bottom line in policing? What is the bottom line in policing? How have communities benefited from the new spending on police departments and police officers? There certainly is a rising cost of policing, and it starts with personnel. Personnel are making higher salaries and receiving increased benefits. There is an increased demand for police at the same time that's resulting in more calls for service, more complex or difficult or violent calls for service. And then the focus on technology that allows us to do less with more, to do less work with more technology. It's amazing how that happens, but that seems to be the case in most places. When we look at the rising cost of police inefficiencies, we see wasteful practices and idle time and mission creep. That means the police are moving into areas that really aren't police work. They're starting to do some things that may be better left to some other agencies like code compliance or code enforcement, agencies like the library or parks and recreation department, other agencies like public works and transportation instead of the police. The police cannot and should not do everything. But when they are relied on to do some things that they shouldn't do, then we start to see the phenomena that's called mission creep. Now, there are concerns about efficiency in policing overall. Wasteful practices do, in fact, have their constituencies in police. A surplus of officers at crime scenes, unnecessary attendance at calls to which the fire department responds first or better, and a lot of idle time after incidents doing follow-up work, uncontrolled expansion in the demand for services, and with it, a subtle and important shift in the mission and the role of police officers. We have become the social agency of first resort, claimed one chief, first resort for the poor. Added another, we need to re-examine police processes to determine just what requires the armed authority of the state in your living room. Let's look here at a chart that depicts Mesa, Arizona government expenditures 2004 to 2008. And I'll move the video up a little bit so we can see more of the chart right here. Are we really doing all of that bad? Look here at some of these areas of policing and what policing is doing or what policing has done over the years in Mesa, Arizona, 2004 to 2008. This shows fiscal year 2004. This column shows fiscal year 2008. Here's the difference in those fiscal years right here and the percentage change. Now, when you go down to the city program over here and you look at the city program, go down to law enforcement right here, we see that in fiscal year 2004, the expenditures on law enforcement were $129,277,000. In 08, 175,449,600. The difference here is $54,172 and $600. That's an increase in expenditures over a 4-year period of 44.7%. Now, there are other areas with even more expenditures, for example, streets here with an increase of 84.7%, but the dollars are much smaller than what we see in the police department. So the police department tends to have the largest percentage budget in any department anywhere in the city, but yet the expenditures also tend to be higher than in most other departments in the city as well. So police, as time has progressed from 2004 to 2008, really have seen some incredible changes in expenditures, mostly for the good or in very, very positive ways. If we treat the number of recorded crimes as the bottom line in policing, then the ROI or return on investment in Mesa appears to be considerable. Was the police department responsible for these changes in Mesa as we saw on the previous chart, or did other factors working independently or in concert with policing cause the reduction in recorded crime? Well, more research would be required to understand the links between perceptions, police practices, and recorded crimes, but it would appear that in Mesa, the residents' sense of safety is shaped less by the visibility of police and levels of crime than by other factors. Response times is the duration of time between the time a call is dispatched to the time an officer arrives on scene. So, does response times really matter? Measuring the bottom line in policing by reference to levels of recorded crime turns out to be only one step towards assigning a value to police performance, or increases in annual per resident policing costs lower than the rate of inflation. Most departments can't answer that question right now because they haven't conducted that type of analysis of their costs. What about your department? Can it answer that question? One way to reduce cost of policing is to enhance productivity or to boost productivity. Other departments have cut relative costs as well by automating key operations and using billboard warnings and cameras and other surrogates for human labor that, at least in some cases, have been shown to produce equal or equivalent feelings of safety. By shifting the emphasis from crime control to public safety, professional reengineering efforts can begin to explore alternative business models, new forms of organization, and new components in the production process, eliminating redundancies in the criminal justice system, promoting the integration of policing with victim services, parole, and probation in ways that might give birth to new and more broad-based problem-solving models in public safety or examples. Yet another strategy for reducing costs is to shift, spread, and share the cost of policing. Some police departments in large suburban areas might be able to shift some of the price of policing back onto the private sector. Another response to the problem of rising costs of policing is to assign values to aspects of police work that are poorly measured or not quantified as benefits. Attributes like quality of service, customer satisfaction, the professional competence, relative resource efficiency are important aspects of public service but currently are not assigned value in many measurement systems. Dignity in treating offenders, discretion in the use of authority, and circumspection in the use of force are also important public goods that contribute to justice and welfare of society, although they do not commonly figure in the cost-benefit ledger for policing. Another strategy is to reappraise the known benefits of policing. Research on the diverse impacts of victimization and especially re-victimization indicates that the value of preventing repeat crime may be greater to victims and society than previously recognized. Other public benefits include diffusing a social tension and preventing the escalation of interracial conflicts. But how do you measure these? These and other virtues are what police executives speak about in academy graduation speeches, and what some residents may constitute, what some residents say may in fact constitute the most prized and powerful aspects of policing in large multi-ethnic cities. Spending on policing, after all, has not risen dramatically everywhere, and it has not risen as rapidly as healthcare costs, for example. So where do we go from here? Science. Well, reducing costs, managing demand, revaluing policing, and re-engineering operations may not solve all of the emerging problems of affordability in policing, but these four steps provide a framework for more deliberate experimentation within individual departments. They also create a framework around which researchers can help police executives study and learn more from their innovations in a time of tight budgets. So looking at police science, should police adopt evidence-based practices? Universities must become active partners with police, and ownership of police science must shift from universities to police agencies. Well, David Weisberg and Peter Nehru believes the advancement of science in policing is essential if police are to retain public support and legitimacy, cope with recessionary budget reductions, and if the industry is to alleviate the problems that have become a part of the policing task. This paradigm demands that the police adopt and advance evidence-based policy and that universities become active participants in the everyday world of police practice. But it also calls for a shift in the ownership of police science from the universities to police agencies. According to these authors, despite the advances made in the use of science in policing and in the leadership and management of policing, science has yet to move center stage. So, what is the significance of that? Academic research is generally divorced from the dynamics of policing. The police operate in a reality in which decisions must be made quickly, and issues of finance and efficiency can be as important as effectiveness. But academic policing research generally ignores these aspects of the police world, often delivering results long after they have relevance, and many times focusing on issues that police managers have very little interest in. In general, the police have tended not to insist on graduate and postgraduate educational and professional standards, or at least have been discouraged from doing so by police unions and other interested political forces, and this has distanced the police even further from academia. Policing is becoming increasingly expensive as a public service, and without a scientific base to legitimize the value of police, it is likely that public policing will face growing threats from other less costly alternatives like private policing, or that many police services now taken for granted will be abandoned. Without scientific evidence and more scientific approaches, police are going to be increasingly vulnerable to politicians and advocates pressing either populist approaches or budget reductions in favor of other services that are able to present better evidence-based business cases for public investment. Does it make sense for an industry that spends $43.3 billion a year in the U.S. alone on personnel, equipment, and infrastructure to spend less than $10 million a year on research? Large police agencies that have budgets of many billions of dollars to have no budget at all for the development of research on what police do? I don't think that's very smart. Do you? Perhaps we should look towards a new paradigm. Because in most police agencies, there are still problems achieving integration between crime analysis and the everyday world of policing, and still less involvement between scientific work in universities and the work of crime analysis and policing. Compare this with laboratories at major university hospitals, where the skills of scientists are not only cutting edge, but are also integrated into a larger world of science. Major university hospitals expect their scientific staff to be conducting research in the best scientific journals. They encourage them to look for new discoveries in their clinical work and to follow standards that are set by national scientific bodies. Police departments do not, on the whole, encourage their scientific staff to publish in scientific journals in criminology. Indeed, they generally discourage them, sometimes citing the fact that adverse results might damage the reputation of the department. Science, in this sense, is not a part of large policing centers. The implications of this is that the scientific quality of crime analysis units is often relatively low. For police science to succeed the way science has in other professions, it must move from the outside to the center of policing. Scientific research must become a natural and organic part of the police mission. Training of police and police researchers will need to take place, at least in part, at university policing centers. And finally, the measures of success of police agencies will have to be changed if police science is to be accorded a high priority within the police. Today, there is limited pressure on police executives to show that their policies and practices are evidence-based. When we look at governing science, we should declare why police should govern the role of science. Here are 3 reasons why the police profession should work particularly hard to govern science at this time. The methods championed by proponents of EBP are fundamentally incompatible with the operational realities of problem-oriented policing. Social scientific research methods embraced by evidence-based policing represent a tiny fraction of the scientific methods relevant to policing. They should therefore represent a small portion of the relevant investment portfolio and should garner a relatively small fraction of the attention given to science. The form of the relationship between police and academia envisaged by evidence-based policing is unstable and unsustainable. There is too much in it for the social scientists and almost nothing in EBP for the police. Now, according to Malcolm Sparrow, evidence-based policing is fundamentally incompatible with problem-oriented policing. Why is this the case? Well, Sparrow gives 7 reasons. First, evidence-based policing is too slow in making determinations to support operational problem solving. It is today's solution to yesterday's problem. 2, evidence-based policing produces no new solutions and may even narrow the range of solutions available. 3, social scientists focus on subtle effects at high levels. Problem solving focuses on much more obvious effects at lower levels. 4, ironically, greater influence of evidence-based policing may reduce the rate of experimentation in policing. 5, evidence-based policing may reinforce and perpetuate the program-centric mindset in policing, which problem-oriented policing was supposed to dispel. 6, with this reliance on statistical techniques, evidence-based policing may not recognize or reward the best problem-solving performance. And then finally, 7, evidence-based policing focuses only on specific interventions and pays little attention to the development of an agency's problem-solving capacity and skills. Looking at problem-oriented policing, POP, as we call it, has profound implications for almost every aspect of a police department's operations. It requires new sets of skills for officers engaging in POP. It requires extensive analytic support at several different stages of the problem-solving process. It makes senior officers responsible for tackling a portfolio of problems or risks, rather than managing a portfolio of programs or functions. It severely stretches the internal fabric of an agency because the majority of problems simply don't fit neatly under existing organizational units. It plunges the agency into a constellation of complicated interagency and cross-sectoral partnerships simply because real-world problems don't respect agency boundaries either. So what should the police do? Well, here are 5 bullet points that declare some of the things that police should do. We should aim to broaden the range of crime analysis techniques that are available. Perhaps police should learn more about the interplay between data mining and investigative fieldcraft. Police should continue to develop internal techniques, develop a clearer vision of what might constitute analytic vigilance for the profession, learning to avoid the failures of the imagination. Policing should explore and import a much broader array of pattern recognition techniques, define and refine the several supporting roles for data analysis, data measurement, and data monitoring. Invest in the quality of analytic support available to operational policing, and continue the drive to elevate crime analysis and intelligence analysis to the status of a profession. But even the most enterprising and the most successful policing leaders have experienced their share of setbacks. What we have to understand is failure will happen, but they don't have to be fatal. Individuals involved need to learn from their mistakes before moving on, and take failures as an opportunity to learn, as an opportunity to improve, as an opportunity to produce a better product the next time around. Failure takes a willingness to take a risk, to be change oriented. But as Dorothy Gallo would say, creating change in police departments can be like bending granite. So why is this change so hard? It's hard because of the volume of work. Because in many cases, police departments are working with outmoded or outdated technology and antiquated facilities. They're missing pertinent data, and in many instances don't understand what data they're actually missing. Arrestee, probationer, parolee, inmate-specific problems, addiction, mental illness, homelessness, history of abuse, chronic dysfunction are all problems and challenges that keep the police from making the necessary changes. So to this point, and I'm going to end on this slide. When we come back, hopefully you will have sent in your questions. Send me 5 questions from this lecture, and that's all you'll have to do. Just 5 questions one time by the 23rd of March, this month, 2 weeks from the 9th of March. Send me 5 questions in, and I will count your attendance that you have viewed the video. I will ask the questions that you send in when we return on the 30th as a part of our class on the 30th. I'm also asking that everybody who is scheduled to have presented up to the point we come to class be ready, because we will have many presentations. Not everybody will be able to present, but be prepared just in case we get to you. So anyway, to all of the rest of you now, I hope you're having a great holiday break, and I look forward to seeing you back in class on March 30th of this year. Take care, and we'll talk to you then.